Welcome to the Success is Subjective podcast, brought to you by collegealternative.org, presented by Lilley Consulting. I'm your host, Joanna Lilley. In today's episode, I had the pleasure of interviewing Lu Vaughn. Lu has worked as an individual and family therapist since 1996. She spent 7 years working internationally in therapeutic boarding schools, 16 years in wilderness therapy as both a primary therapist and clinical director, and most recently, the last few years, she's pivoted to become a parent and young adult coach. Although she's worked with a wide variety of clinical issues, her expertise is in addiction, recovery, and defiance. She actually views defiance as a great personal strength. Those who have had the greatest impact on our world did so through defiance. She believes that defiance is truly a superpower. And speaking of superpowers, she is a grandmother of 4 boys who she gets to see every single day. Lu loves the outdoors, adventure, and travel. She believes in challenging herself and those she works with, specifically to get outside of their comfort zones to learn more about themselves and their world. Her favorite thing to do is anything that she has never done before. Now, Lu is amazing, so let's not wait any longer. Let's jump right in. Here's Lu. All right, Lu, I'm super excited to have you on the podcast. Thank you for carving out some time to chat with me.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, I'm super excited. Let's dive right in. Why don't you tell the listeners, where did you grow up and what was the information that you were getting, from your immediate family as well as kind of the community in which you were raised about the idea of post-secondary education?
Okay, so I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia in the 60s, 70s, which was and still is a very meaningful time. And when I think back in my childhood, because I felt like I was sitting on the front porch of the whole civil rights movement and watching that happen in real time. And even as I think back about that today, I can get emotional and teary about that very important impression in my life. And interestingly, I grew up in a Jewish community. I am not a Jewish person myself, but I grew up in a Jewish community surrounded by synagogue and multi-generational families. And so my family, neither one of my parents finished college. Both of them tinkered in it. My dad went to college on a football scholarship, but then ended up in the service for the Korean War. And my mom did not, she took some college classes when I, the youngest child, started school. So as an adult, she took some classes, but neither one of them completed college. But in this community I grew up in, it was never a consideration to not go to college. I think back on my, the community was very tight. At that time, the schools were neighborhood schools. So the elementary school and the high school only had, 400 or 500 students because 2 miles down the road, there was another elementary school and the high school. And so we went from first grade to 12th grade with the same friends, the same families. And I cannot think of a single friend that didn't go to college. I don't remember being told you have to go to college, but I don't remember thinking anything different. So it was an expectation. It was a given. And you just kind of followed the people in front of you of when you started looking for your school and moving on. So between community and family, post-secondary education was a given, no questions asked.
So I'm so curious then, what did you end up doing?
I went to college. I was a very good, and I have no doubt, I have no regrets for that. Now, here's what's interesting is that I have brother and sister, older brother and sister, I'm the youngest of 3, who went to UGA, Go Dogs. And when it came time, we were 5 years apart. And when it came time for me to choose my college, it was anywhere but Georgia. There's a defiant streak in me, and I ended up choosing a very small private college in Western North Carolina, in the mountains of North Carolina. And a funny story. At the time, college was affordable, even for my very blue-collared, non-college educated parents. My brother and sister go to a state college. It cost them $500-$600 a year at the time. And I chose this private college. Mars Hill College is where I went in Western North Carolina. And it was $5,000 a year. And that was over the top. And my parents had promised us, each kid, that if we got a college scholarship, they'd buy us a car so we could take a car to college. And I did. I got a small scholarship, yet I was going to this extraordinarily expensive school at $5,000 a year. And I remember my very first day of college, my parents drove me up, they dropped me off, they unloaded me, and they hightailed it out of there. I mean, it was like gone. And I think as the youngest child, they were excited to have their kids out. And as I was unpacking my dorm room, there was a small wrapped box on the bed, and I open it up, and there's a letter. My dad was a prolific writer, and he wrote this beautiful letter of hope and encouragement. And he went on to say, I know I promised you a car if you got a scholarship, but we were unable to do that at this time. I hope this will help you get your own car. I opened it up. It was a calculator. So because I chose the highfalutin school at $5,000 a year, I didn't get a car. I got a calculator. And I have that letter to this day. That is very special.
I love that. And it's so funny because we make jokes about this offline too, right? SEC versus Big 12. And so obviously you're still, I love that you said like, I've got a little like, I've got this little like resistance streak where I was like, I'm going to go anywhere but Georgia. And obviously you made that choice too. And parents kind of were able to hold that line of like, look, we're willing to support you going to the school, but it's really expensive. And because of that, we can't provide or deliver what we said we were going to do. So I love this little gift of a calculator to figure that out.
Well, and it was not only, they could hold that boundary. We'll give you what you want, but can't give you this. And it was the encouragement. And we have every belief in the world and confidence in the world that you'll figure out how to get it done.
Yep. No doubt. So, well, obviously I want to ask the question, like, when did you end up getting your car? But I feel like maybe you could share that at some point, but I'm just kind of curious now that you're a Georgia girl going to school, growing up in a Jewish community, even though you're not Jewish. And then you pick this private school in Western North Carolina.
Baptist, by the way, Baptist.
Ooh. Yeah. Okay. Obviously, I have a strong reaction to that, but I'll save that for another time. What was your experience in college like?
I loved it. I loved college. It was great. I made great friends. I always had a sense of independence. And so feeling, this was really, as I look back on it, truly my individuation. I'm not going to Georgia because that's where everybody went. I'm going to leave this state. To this day, my brother and sister still live in Atlanta. I'm the only person that ever left, and I did it at 17 years old and never went back. So it was truly college for me was truly an individuation. It's where I kind of created my identity and became an individual. And I loved it. I had a great time. It is funny that I was raised in a Jewish community, chose a Baptist school, and then defied every rule that they put on us. I think it was all an exercise in individuation and independence. But it was meant to be. I fell in love with the mountains. I fell in love with the wilderness, and eventually I became a wilderness therapist. But it was really my self-discovery. It was, who am I? That question got answered in those 4 years.
Yeah, I love that. So you just kind of obviously dropped a little bit of a hint of kind of where your journey eventually took you, but why don't you fill in even some of those gaps of like the experience, the growth, the individuation at Mars Hill, and what were some of those chapters of your life leading up to being a wilderness therapist? And then obviously I'm going to shock the world and let folks know already, you're not doing that right now. So that means there's even more to the story leading up to the work that you're doing now. But for right now, just kind of fill us in on like, what was that transition after college leading into kind of the work journey that you had to part of that?
Yeah, I look back, I'm 60 now, and I look back and I am so thrilled with my journey. It makes me smile because I've been everything from, a golf course manager, to a wilderness therapist. So I majored in social work. I knew I was going to be a helper. That was a given for me. But I really had political aspirations. So, when I graduated from Mars Hill, I started working, and I was a right around social worker with the Head Start program. I shifted into a recreation and parks, but I was, again, an outreach coordinator. I worked with senior citizens in the community and did outreach with them. So I was in this helping profession, and I decided it was time to go back to grad school. I went to Western Carolina and was getting my master's degree in public affairs because my vision was, I'm a loud, passionate person. I mean, just let's get real. I am loud and passionate. And so my vision of my life was I was going to head to DC and I was going to be loud and passionate about the things I was loud and passionate about. And my dream was to be a lobbyist, honestly. I wanted to go be a lobbyist and fight for the underdogs. That's where I absolutely thought I was going. And so I was in these nonprofit government NGOs and municipal government. That's where I was going. So it was Head Start. It was the town of Black Mountain. I was doing the outreach. I actually advanced into the Recreation and Parks Director for the town of Black Mountain. That's where I ran the golf course. What was that about? I don't know. But anyhow, it was, and I was kind of plugging along. I was doing these jobs and I was growing and I was learning. I was in grad school. I felt like I was on the right track to government work and municipal work, but I wasn't happy, right? I thought I was doing everything I was supposed to be doing. And here's a really interesting story. It's a life-changing story. I was the Recreation and Parks Director for the town of Black Mountain, and I was doing, I was getting lots of experience. I had to present to town boards, and I had to write big budgets, and I had to build parks, and so it's a lot of interesting work, but I wasn't feeling fulfilled. And then one day I woke up and I had I got a sty on my eye. And it was like, oh, that hurts, And I was just kind of plugging along and, a week went by and this sty wasn't getting any better. It was getting worse. And I remember waking up one morning and I went to the mirror and I literally couldn't open my eye, right? It was like really gotten bad and my vision was blurry. And I said out loud, I said, God, I can't even see clearly. And when those words came out of my mouth, I went, oh, I am not seeing things clearly, right? And so I got dressed and I went to work and I crossed the parking lot from my office over to the town manager's office. And I sat down and said, I quit. I had no idea what I was doing. But I just knew when those words came out of my mouth that I'm not seeing things clearly, that I wasn't in the right place. So I turned in my resignation, 2 weeks notice or whatever I did, whatever was appropriate. I can't remember. And I walked back over to my office and I sat down at my desk and I just kind of leaned back and trembling with fear. The phone rings and, I answered the phone and it was, I won't call his name. It's not important, but it was in the town of Black Mountain, which is just east of Asheville, is a state-run drug and alcohol abuse treatment center. And I just said I'm not going to call his name, but the director of that drug and alcohol abuse treatment center knew who I was because he had kids in the rec leagues and whatnot. And he just said, hey, Lou, I'm wondering, our recreation director over here at ADAC has quit. Would you be interested in the job? I mean, literally, this was 5 minutes after I just quit my job. I am not kidding you. And I said, yes, please. I said, matter of fact, I just quit my job. Well, interestingly enough, because it's a state job and there's lots of politics and who you know and what you know, it ended up that I couldn't have that job because somebody's cousin's brother got the job. And so that job fell through, but then a social worker's position opened and he offered me that job instead. So I ended up going over to the Drug and Alcohol Abuse Treatment Center as a social worker, and I took that job. And suddenly my sty went away. It's just like the sty was gone. I was seeing clearly. I was feeling purposeful. I was feeling back on track. And I thought, I totally went to graduate school and got the wrong degree. Right? And it's like, wow, good call. So I decided I wanted to be a therapist. And the state of North Carolina, God love them, I still live here, paid for my way to go back to grad school. And so I did round 2 of grad school at Western Carolina and got my degree in community counseling. And I hung up my hat of my political aspirations, make that a part-time personal, I go to the marches I go to and whatever. And yeah, I became a licensed therapist. Thank you, state of North Carolina.
Well, I was just going to say, too, you're still loud and passionate, but you're just now loud and passionate about being able to help individuals. So I think honestly, it was a subtle shift in terms of like the trajectory you were on. And it kind of takes me back to like, those stories of people that are saying like, if you're out at sea and you're like 1 degree off, your end destination ends up being like a world away from where you were really meant to be. But it sounded like some of the things that you said, like literally and figuratively, like I can't see clearly, then just became this like righting of the ship of getting you back on course. And I got chills. Obviously, I'm over here on mute, but I got chills when you told the story about how they called you not even 5 minutes after and offered you the job. I mean, that is like divine intervention in some respects. And so it just sounds like the universe really was just waiting for you to make that realization for yourself.
And I am not exaggerating that. That was absolutely the true story. I mean, and that story has always clung to me. And when you say the universe, I'm a big believer, having growing up in a Jewish community, going to a Baptist college, whatever. But my true belief has come from that moment is I believe in synchronicity. And if we pay attention, and that until that sty had to get so bad it forced me to pay attention. But if we just pay attention, get out of the way, the path will present itself. Yeah. I really do believe that.
Well, thank you to the state of North Carolina for paying for you to go back to school and get your second degree, because then that obviously got you back on the path that you're on now. So at what point did you end up becoming a wilderness therapist? Like, where did the journey take you leading up to that point?
Well, interesting story. So, after I got my degree, I continued to work around Western Carolina a bit. I worked as a program director at a therapeutic community. I was at ADAC for many years. Then I was just feeling the time to shift. I was getting restless. I was ready to move. It had been nearly 20 years at this point since I had arrived in North Carolina. So it was late 90s, 2000. And I just started looking. Anybody of any age remembers back in the day, it was monster.com. The internet was pretty new, right? And that was the Indeed of then, I guess. And so I put my resume out on monster.com and I just started looking around because, this was all new to me that you could look for jobs it was exciting. And I found this job offering for a therapist for adolescent boys in a little place called Bahia de Quino, Mexico. And this is what's interesting. And this is my entry into the industry I now work in with therapeutic programs and boarding schools. Ironically, I had to leave Asheville, North Carolina to find it. Because there was nothing in Asheville at the time, but now it's all irony. So anyhow, I talked to the folks at it was a program called Positive Impact. And they flew me down. I went, ooh, trip to Mexico. How exciting. And I fell in love and I left Asheville and I packed up a van and what belongings I had. And I drove across the country and down into Mexico and became a therapist at Positive Impact in Quino Bay, Mexico. And it might be the single greatest job I ever had. I loved it, loved it, loved it. It was exciting. It was taking adolescent boys from the States, getting them out of their comfort zone, which is what I live to do, and learning how, different communities live and thrive and connect. And I really love that. The question was, how did that lead me to wilderness therapy? Well, interestingly enough, a really well-known wilderness therapist, and I shared a similar kid. These young men would show up in his group, and then they would tend to trickle down to me, and that would be Brad Reedy. And so these kids would go to Brad Reedy's groups, and we worked with the same kind of kid, and they'd end up with me often. And due to unforeseen circumstances and whatever, it was around 2005, the program closed down. And I was leaving Mexico and didn't know what I was going to do next, and driving back across country to Atlanta. My mom was ill at the time, and I thought this was a really good opportunity I was free, she needed help, I could step in and be helpful to her. Driving cross country, I did receive a phone call from Brad Reedy, who I will be forever thankful for, and said, hey, why don't you hang a left, and come up to Utah? And I said, well, thank you, and I appreciate the offer, but I really do have to head to Atlanta. Well, just so, again, synchronicity, just so happened that was the very year that Second Nature Blue Ridge was opening its doors. And so he said, give me just a minute. I hung up. I'm still driving across country. A phone call comes in from Dan McDougall at Blue Ridge and says, hey, I was told that maybe you'd be interested. And the rest is history. The beauty is I was able to go home. I was able to be with my mom as the last year of her life. And so I was able, which was super meaningful to me. And if I could take a second about that, what I learned was I thought I was going to sit with my mom for the last year of her life. Well, I didn't know it was the last year, but this time in her life, and kind of sit at the feet of wisdom and learn everything I could from the elders. And what I learned is that no matter how old we are, we don't know what we're doing. And what I learned from her is, she was dying and she didn't know how to die. She didn't know how to do that. And so it's like, I came away from that saying, we just always keep doing the best we can. But the truth is we never really know what we're doing. And that's okay. Right. And so I was able to be there for my mom. And then I was able to, Clayton was just 90 minutes from my mom's house. So it was easy to go up there. And that was what started my wilderness therapy career. And, up until 2021, that's what I did.
Wow. Yeah, I love how you continued to use that synchronicity as the way of describing how things just kind of like come together. I do think that, obviously 2021, again, you're not with them anymore, right? You've shifted gears to another chapter in your personal and professional life. And so I think that's kind of cool that we can highlight that here in a second. But that was a long journey. In terms of being a wilderness therapist or having the opportunity to kind of work in the wilderness therapy field, especially during kind of that post-recession leading up to 2021 time period where there's a lot of shifts that have happened in adolescent and young adult treatment. So it's kind of cool that you're a part of that journey. Okay, so I'm just going to ask you, here's the shameless plug. What is the work that you are doing right now and have been doing since 2021?
So to kind of lead up to that, it was February, March 2020. We all have that blazed into our head. I was sitting this time from 2016 to 2020, I was actually working Second Nature Utah, and I was commuting, and I would fly out every week and go out into the field and fly home and do my parent calls. And I'm forever grateful to Devin Glissmeyer for making that happen. And it was early 2020, and I was sitting here in North Carolina on my back porch doing family calls, and Devin Glissmeyer calls me and says, okay, Lou, so this virus thing, people are concerned about it, and, the state of Utah has said we are essential workers, we can continue to work, the program will keep going, but you can't fly. And so it's like, okay. So he said, get a car, drive out, we'll find a place, it'll be great. And so I did. And I'm not crying too loud because if you have to be deployed, Park City, Utah is not the worst place in the world to be deployed to. And so, it was beautiful. The difficulty of it was that, the thought was it would be, 4 to 6 weeks. Well, we know what happened there. So that became difficult. The length was difficult. The other thing that was difficult is, we all know Park City being a vacation place, and people weren't vacationing at the time. So I was in a lovely condo And I was like literally one of three people in the entire building. So it was very quiet, very isolated, very, tough. And my partner had just passed too the year prior. So it was a hard year on everybody. We all have our pandemic year story. And so it was at the end of 2020, I was still there. We all were like, this thing's never going to end. I was still there. And I had to come home. I had not been home in a year. So the thought was I would close down the group. I would come home. The vaccines were out. I would get vaccinated. I'd head back to work. So I took a long drive home. I took like 9 or 10 days to get home. I went to every national park between here and there. I was the only person there. It was a beautiful journey. It really was a lovely journey. And it reminds me of 20 years earlier when I was driving across the country and I got a call and said, hey, what about? I got the same call. I was driving across the country. I got the same call from my dear old good friend, Jen Murphy. And, Jim Murphy and Hillary Moses had started Solutions Parenting Support. And she just on a whim just said, hey, how you doing? Just want to check in and just thinking, hey, have you been thinking about leaving the field? And if you did, we'd love to bring you on. And, and I thought I was flattered, but I thought, no, whatever, silly. Until I got home and I started thinking, do I really want to leave again? I had been gone a year from my home. And so I started giving it thought, and I was scared. I was really scared to let go of a consistent paycheck and health insurance and all those things. I was terrified. But I decided that being at home after all the loss that we had all experienced, being at home and feeling grounded again was going to be important. And I have grandkids that live right across the street. And so I took a risk. And so what I'm doing now is a plethora of things. I was able to create Lu V, this was a gift from my dad. Lu V is love. So love counseling services. And I do several things. I contract with Jen and Hillary through Solutions Parenting Support to do parent coaching, preventative coaching, parallel coaching with parents who have kids in treatment, transition coaching with parents who are bringing kids home from treatment. I've also, opened up because I've worked with boys in wilderness all these years. I have, recovery coaching for young men, many of them who were in my group 10 years ago have reached out and found me, and I'm doing recovery. I'm doing all this over Zoom, doing recovery coaching with them, just helping them into their adult lives. I also am privileged and honored to work with Imbalance Academy. I do once a month staff training with them. I also conduct their parent coaching group twice a month. And so I've really been able to diversify and kind of now just do anything I want to do, right? and one of my passions, like I said, what I am most passionate about is getting outside my comfort zone. I just like it. My favorite thing to do is anything I haven't done before. And so this has opened up, and now that, the pandemic is getting further and further behind us and travel is opening up, it's now really allowed me to open up and travel. I was lucky and blessed to be asked by the folks at Imbalance to accompany their kids on an international trip to Nepal, which was fabulous. Just took a trip to Morocco with some girlfriends. I'm planning on South Africa this week. So I'm out and about again. And I feel like I'm kind of just doing whatever I want while still very engaged in my work. And I just feel so grateful to have landed in this place. And, success is with a capital S. The question is, do I feel successful? Yeah, I do. And not because I live in a castle or a mansion and make tons of money, but because I really do feel like I'm serving a purpose and doing what I want to do. And that to me is success.
Well, and I don't see a sty on your eye right now from where I'm sitting. So I would say that to go back to your kind of phrase from before, it seems like you continue to be seeing clearly what you need to be doing and who you need to be around. And you need to listen to those phone calls as they come in when you're least expecting them, because it continues to carry you on this path and this journey where you are now, which is pretty stinking cool. So you already answered the question. Obviously, you see yourself as successful with a capital S, which I love. So since you are working with young adults and you're working with parents, I'm going to ask you this kind of question twofold. So we're going to split it. So if you could give one piece of advice to a young adult right now, what piece of advice would you give? And then the follow-up is, for parents of young adults that are struggling, what advice, you're dealing with this on a daily basis. So what do you feel like is top of mind that you can impart to parents right now?
And interestingly enough, it's the same exact piece of advice. And it's just tap the brakes, just slow down. The urgency you're feeling is not necessary. It's really not, I think about my own self as the young person, okay, so I got the wrong degree. Oh, well, does that mean I have to, stick to this and go? No, just tap the brakes and do it again. And there's plenty of time. And I think with parents, part of their anxiety and fear with their struggling kids is they shouldn't be struggling. They should be doing something else. It's like they should on themselves, they should on their kids, and we should, right? And it's just like, just tap the brakes. And I think if you ask any of the parents I've worked with in the last couple of years, what is the one thing Lu taught you? They'd almost inevitably say, tap the brakes, So that's it. Just slow down. There's time. There really is time. And it's okay. And just slow down, take a breath, tap the brakes.
Yeah, that's so important. I'm glad that you said that it was universal for both, because it's such an important, whether you're 20 or whether you're, 60, doesn't matter. I actually think that this is even a product of like post-COVID, if that's an expression we can use, that it feels even more important for us to talk about the importance of slowing down. So I feel like maybe that needs to be my own mantra. Tap the brakes, Joanna.
Tap the brakes.
Okay, so Lu, I really do appreciate you coming on the podcast and sharing your story. So before we completely wrap up, how can folks connect with you? So if there's a parent here that's listening and they're like, hey, maybe I'm interested in having Lu coach us, or a young adult that's in recovery and could benefit from a new kind of support service, how do they connect with you?
So you can reach me at Lu V Counseling Services at gmail.com. You can also find my bio and connect, especially if you're a parent, at solutionsparentingsupport.com. You can call me at 404-558-8747.
All right. Well, we'll make sure we have the links and the numbers and everything in the show notes. So when the podcast interview actually goes live, you can just easily click on those to connect with Lu. Okay. So I'm going to say this because I say it to everybody, but I genuinely mean it after every interview. Like I can't express enough of the gratitude that I have for you taking the time to be on this, to share your story, to be vulnerable, to be transparent, honest, and just kind of share some info that not everybody knows, but definitely imparting your knowledge, your expertise, and then just kind of demystifying the definition of success, because I think actually a part of the advice that you gave, tapping on the brakes, is tied to this idea of what success needs to look like, whether it's the parent driving that image or the young adult kind of holding on to something that may or may not be actually like where they need to be headed. So I think it's all tied together, but I really appreciate you sharing your story. And I know that there's at least one person that is listening to this that is going to reach out to you to say thank you, and or they'll reach out to you, say, Lu, I need your help. So I hope they do that. This is my call to action to that person or those people to do just what you need to do and actually take the time, use this as your own synchronicity to reach out to Lu after hearing her story. So thanks, Lu.
Oh, Joanna, thank you. And I feel honored and privileged to be included. So thank you.
That's it for this week's Success is Subjective episode. I want to thank my guests for joining me on this week and for being willing to share your journey. This podcast would not exist if it wasn't for people such as yourself. Stay tuned for the next episode where you can bet it'll be another amazing human sharing their personal story with the world. Make sure you check out the show notes where you will find contact information, website details, and all social media for our guests. And also put a face with a voice by accessing their interview on the newly formed successissubjective.org website. If you're interested in being a guest on the podcast, you can email me at Joanna, Joanna, at successissubjective.org. I would also be remiss if I didn't tell you to check out the collegealternative.org and lilyconsulting.com websites for additional resources outside of podcasting. If you're listening to the show on Apple Podcasts, please do me a favor and subscribe. And while you're at it, feel free to leave a review. You can also download to listen to Success is Subjective on any other popular podcast apps such as Amazon, Audible, Google, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn Radio. And last but not least, Success is Subjective is listener supported, made possible by me and by you. You can show support for the continuation of this podcast by donating on the successissubjective.org website. Thank you for tuning in, and remember, there is no single path through life. Success is what you make it.
Do you have a teenager or young adult who seems to have lost their way? Maybe they need help navigating adolescence, adulthood, and decisions surrounding higher education. Or maybe they have become withdrawn, their grades are slipping, or they are flat out living a reckless lifestyle, and you're concerned about their health and well-being. If this describes what your teen or young adult is facing, a therapeutic consultant may be able to help. Mental health, addiction recovery, and higher education can all be equally expensive. While information is everywhere, how do you know what option is the best one for your family? Some parents have the time to research and navigate this on their own. Some don't. If the latter applies to you, enter therapeutic consultants. Therapeutic consultants, like Joanna, listen to your family's specific needs and advocate on behalf of your loved one. TCs will research therapeutic resources, recommend treatment programs, and assist during adulthood transitions. Not being affiliated with any program, their support is completely objective and catered toward the best interest of each unique family. To find a qualified therapeutic consultant to work with, check out TCA, also known as the Therapeutic Consulting Association. Their website is therapeuticconsulting.org, all one word. Again, that's therapeuticconsulting.org. Then click the Find a Pro tab up at the top.